Chapter 1. December 17th, 1981, began as an ordinary summer day in Perth, Western Australia. The temperature climbed toward 35 degrees Celsius by mid-morning, typical for the weeks leading up to Christmas in the Southern Hemisphere. Schools had broken for the summer holidays, and shopping centers across the city buzzed with families preparing for the festive season. Emma Mitchell, 16 years old, and her younger sister Claire, 14, had been given permission by their parents to spend the afternoon at Carousel Shopping Centre in Cannington. It was a special treat, a chance for the girls to do their Christmas shopping independently and perhaps grab lunch at one of the food court restaurants. Their mother, Helen Mitchell, dropped them off at the main entrance at 1:45 in the afternoon. She watched as her daughters walked through the automatic doors, Emma's long blonde hair swinging in its ponytail, Claire's darker curls bouncing as she laughed at something her sister said. Helen planned to return at 5:30 to collect them, giving the girls nearly 4 hours of shopping time. It was the last time anyone who loved them would see Emma and Claire Mitchell alive. The Carousel Shopping Centre was one of Perth's largest retail complexes. Opened just 4 years earlier, in 1977. It featured more than 100 stores across multiple levels, connected by escalators and lifts. The design was modern for its time, with wide corridors, skylights letting in natural light, and a large food court that served as a central gathering point. Security was managed by a small team led by David Chen, a 36-year-old former police officer who'd left the force after an injury ended his patrol career. The center had installed closed-circuit television cameras in 1979, considered cutting-edge security technology at the time. Cameras covered main entrances, the food court, and the multi-level parking garage. Emma and Claire entered the shopping center through the eastern entrance, captured clearly on the security footage. The timestamp read 13:52. Emma wore denim shorts and a pink t-shirt. Claire had on a yellow sundress. Both carried small shoulder bags. Over the next 2 hours, various cameras caught glimpses of the sisters moving through the center. At 14:15, they were seen browsing in a record store. At 14:43, they purchased soft drinks at the food court. At 15:20, they entered a clothing boutique called Fashion First. After that, the trail went cold. When Helen Mitchell arrived at 5:30 to collect her daughters, she parked near the eastern entrance and waited. 5:45 came and went with no sign of the girls. By 6 o'clock, Helen was worried. She went inside and walked through the shopping center, checking their favorite stores, asking shop assistants if they'd seen 2 teenage girls matching her daughter's descriptions. No one had seen them recently. By 6:30, with the shopping center preparing to close, Helen approached the security desk and reported her daughters missing. David Chen took the report seriously. Missing children in shopping centers weren't uncommon. Usually they'd wandered off or lost track of time, but he'd learned during his police days never to dismiss a parent's concern. He immediately dispatched his security team to search the entire complex while reviewing security footage. What he found troubled him. The cameras showed Emma and Claire entering Fashion First at 15:20, but there was no footage of them leaving. Chen checked the camera covering that section of the corridor. It had functioned properly all afternoon, recording everyone who passed. The sisters should have been visible when they exited the store, but they weren't. Chen expanded his search, checking footage from all cameras, looking for any glimpse of the girls after 15:20. Nothing. It was as if they'd simply vanished inside Fashion First. He went to the store himself, which had closed at 6. The manager, a woman named Patricia Walsh, was cashing up. Chen asked about the Mitchell sisters. Yes, they were in here, Walsh confirmed. 2 girls, teenagers. They looked at some dresses and tried on a few items. I remember because the younger one was very chatty, kept asking her sister's opinion on everything. What time did they leave? Chen asked. Walsh thought for a moment. Around 3:30, I think. Maybe a bit later. The store was busy. I didn't pay close attention to exactly when they left. Did you see which direction they went? No, Walsh said. I was helping another customer. I assumed they went back out into the corridor, but I didn't actually see them go. Chen thanked her and returned to the security office. If the girls had left Fashion First around 15:30 or shortly after, where had they gone? Why weren't they on camera? He reviewed footage from the parking garage cameras. The multi-level car park was accessed from several points within the shopping center. If the girls had decided to go to the car to wait for their mother, that might explain why they weren't seen in the main shopping areas. And there, on the parking garage footage, he found them. The timestamp read 16:27. Emma and Claire Mitchell walked into the parking garage on level 2, heading toward the area where their mother usually parked. They moved purposefully, as if they knew where they were going. Chen watched as the girls walked deeper into the parking area. The camera angle changed, showing them from a different position. They were passing between rows of parked cars when the footage suddenly went black. Chen frowned and checked the system. According to the logs, the parking garage camera had experienced a technical malfunction at 16:28 and hadn't come back online until 17:15. The exact period when the Mitchell sisters would have been in the garage was missing from the recording. A cold feeling settled in Chen's stomach. He'd worked with these cameras for 2 years. They were reliable, rarely malfunctioned. For one to fail at this exact moment seemed like an impossible coincidence. By 7 o'clock, with the shopping center closed and no sign of the Mitchell girls, Chen called the police. Chapter 2. Detective Senior Sergeant James Whitfield arrived at Carousel Shopping Centre at 7:45. He was a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face that reflected 27 years in the Western Australia police force. He'd worked everything from petty theft to homicide, and he had an instinct for when something was seriously wrong. This felt seriously wrong. He was accompanied by Detective Constable Sandra Cooper, a relatively new addition to the Criminal Investigation Branch, who'd quickly proven herself capable and thorough. Together, they met with David Chen in the security office and reviewed everything he'd discovered. So the last definite sighting is them entering the parking garage at 16:27, Whitfield said, watching the footage for the third time. Then the camera fails. For how long? 47 minutes, Chen replied. It came back online at 17:15. By then, the girls were gone. Show me the footage after it came back online, Whitfield instructed. Chen queued up the recording. The parking garage, now with far fewer cars as people had left for the day. No sign of the Mitchell sisters, no sign of anything unusual. Cooper leaned forward, studying the screen. What about the other cameras? The ones covering the exit ramps? Chen switched feeds. Those cameras had worked perfectly all afternoon. They showed various vehicles leaving the garage, but none contained 2 teenage girls that Cooper and Whitfield could see. They would have had to leave in a vehicle, Cooper said. 2 girls on foot would be noticed, especially carrying shopping bags, unless they weren't carrying bags anymore, Whitfield noted. Mr. Chen, were any shopping bags or personal items found in the garage? We did a thorough search before you arrived, Chen said. Found nothing belonging to the girls. No bags, no purses, nothing. Whitfield turned to Cooper. Get the parents here. We need recent photos and detailed descriptions. And contact the media liaison. I want this on the late news tonight. The more eyes looking for these girls, the better. While Cooper made the calls, Whitfield walked through the shopping center himself, retracing the route the sisters had taken. From the eastern entrance, through the corridors to Fashion First, then the path to the parking garage. He timed it, 8 minutes at a casual walking pace. He examined the area around Fashion First carefully. The store was located in a section of the mall that had consistent camera coverage. There was no way the girls could have left through the main corridor without being seen. But there were other possibilities. Service corridors, Whitfield said when Chen joined him. Where do they go? Chen pulled out a floor plan. There are service corridors behind all the retail spaces. They're used for deliveries, rubbish removal, employee access. They connect to the loading docks at the back of the building. Are they accessible from inside the stores? Most stores have a back door to the service corridor, Chen confirmed, but they're usually kept locked. Only staff have keys. Usually, Whitfield repeated. But not always? Chen hesitated. Sometimes during busy periods, staff prop doors open for ventilation or to move stock more easily. It's against regulations, but it happens. Show me the service corridor behind Fashion First, Whitfield said. They walked through the now empty shopping center to a plain door marked Staff Only. Chen unlocked it, revealing a stark concrete corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It smelled of dust and cardboard. They walked to the rear of Fashion First. Sure enough, there was a door marked with the store's name. Whitfield tried the handle. Locked. Was this door locked all afternoon yesterday? Whitfield asked. I don't know, Chen admitted. We don't monitor the service corridors closely. They're not public areas. Are there cameras back here? No, sir. Budget constraints. We focused on customer areas. Whitfield made notes. So theoretically, if this door was unlocked, someone could have brought the girls back here without being seen on your main cameras. Theoretically, yes, Chen agreed, looking uncomfortable. But who would do that? And how would they know the door was unlocked? Questions we need to answer, Whitfield said grimly. Robert and Helen Mitchell arrived at 8:30, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Helen clutched a recent photograph of her daughters, taken just 2 weeks earlier at Emma's 16th birthday party. Both girls smiled at the camera, arms around each other, looking happy and carefree. Whitfield took them to a quiet office and gently asked them to describe the girls, what they'd been wearing, any distinguishing features. Helen's voice shook as she provided details. Emma had a small scar on her left knee from falling off her bike as a child. Claire wore a silver bracelet that had been a birthday gift from her grandmother. Did the girls mention meeting anyone at the shopping center? Whitfield asked. Friends, acquaintances? No, Robert said firmly. They were shopping together, just the two of them. Emma is responsible. She looks after her sister. She wouldn't have gone off with strangers. What about people they knew? Whitfield pressed gently. Teachers, neighbors, family friends. Helen and Robert looked at each other, clearly thinking through possibilities. Finally, Helen shook her head. There's no one. Everyone we know is accounted for. We've already called everyone we could think of. No one has seen them. By 9 o'clock that night, a full-scale search was underway. Police officers combed through Carousel Shopping Centre and the surrounding area. The Perth media ran stories on the late news showing photographs of Emma and Claire Mitchell and asking anyone with information to contact police. Tips began coming in immediately. Someone thought they'd seen 2 girls matching the description at a bus stop. Another caller reported seeing them at a different shopping center. Each lead was investigated. Each one led nowhere. Whitfield established a command post at the Cannington police station. As midnight approached, he stood before a whiteboard covered with notes and timelines, trying to make sense of what had happened. Cooper joined him with coffee. What are you thinking? Whitfield circled the time 16:28 on the timeline. This is when the camera failed. For 47 minutes. That's not chance, Sandra. That's planning. Someone sabotaged the camera? Cooper asked. Or knew how to disable it temporarily, Whitfield said. Either way, it suggests premeditation. Someone knew the girls would be in that parking garage and knew exactly when the camera would be down. But how could they know the girls would be there? Cooper objected. The family says it was a last-minute decision to go shopping. Emma and Claire didn't tell anyone outside the family. Whitfield tapped the photograph of the smiling sisters. Then either someone followed them from home, or someone at the shopping center targeted them opportunistically. The opportunistic theory doesn't fit with the camera failure, Cooper pointed out. That suggests planning. Which brings us back to the possibility that someone followed them, Whitfield said. Someone who knew they'd be at Carousel that afternoon, and was prepared to act. They both fell silent, contemplating the disturbing implications. Chapter 3. The search for Emma and Claire Mitchell intensified over the following days. Police dogs tracked scents through the parking garage, but lost them at the exit ramp, suggesting the girls had been taken away in a vehicle. Officers interviewed every shop worker who'd been on duty at Carousel on December 17th, building a comprehensive picture of the sisters' movements. Patricia Walsh, the fashion-first manager, provided more details under thorough questioning. She described the girls as polite and well-behaved. Emma had tried on a dress but decided it was too expensive. Claire had been more interested in accessories, spending time looking at scarves and jewelry. Did anyone show unusual interest in them while they were in your store? Whitfield asked. Walsh thought carefully. The store was busy that afternoon. Lots of Christmas shoppers. But now that you mention it, there was a man who came in shortly after the girls. He didn't look at merchandise, just sort of wandered around. I remember thinking it was odd because men don't usually browse alone in a women's clothing store. Can you describe him? Cooper asked, pen poised over her notebook. Middle-aged, maybe 40 or 45, Walsh said. Average height, average build. He wore sunglasses inside, which I thought was strange. Dark hair, I think, though he had a cap on. Jeans and a polo shirt. Did you see him follow the girls when they left? I didn't see the girls leave, Walsh reminded them. And I don't know when the man left either. Like I said, it was busy. Whitfield arranged for Walsh to work with a police sketch artist. The resulting image showed a nondescript middle-aged man in sunglasses and a cap. It could have been almost anyone. The sketch was released to the media on December 20th, 3 days after the disappearance. The television news featured it prominently, and the hotline was flooded with calls. Dozens of people reported seeing men who matched the vague description. Each report was investigated. None led to the Mitchell sisters. Meanwhile, Forensic technicians examined the security camera system at Carousel. Their findings confirmed Whitfield's suspicions. The camera covering the parking garage had been deliberately disabled, not by physical tampering, but by someone with knowledge of the system who'd accessed the control panel and shut it off remotely. This requires technical expertise, the lead technician explained to Whitfield. Someone who understands surveillance systems, not something a casual criminal would know. Who has access to the control panel? Whitfield asked. The security staff, the technician replied, and potentially the company that installed and maintains the system. Get me a list of everyone with that knowledge and access, Whitfield ordered. David Chen provided the names of his security team, 4 men and 2 women who worked rotating shifts. All were interviewed extensively. All claimed to have been elsewhere when the camera was disabled. All had alibis that checked out. The installation company, Secure Watch Systems, provided a list of their technicians who'd worked on the Carousel system. That list included 12 people, all of whom were interviewed. Again, everyone had alibis. Whitfield felt frustration building. Someone had disabled that camera. Someone with specific knowledge and access. Yet everyone who fit that description appeared to be innocent. Unless the person who disabled the camera wasn't working alone, Cooper suggested during one of their late-night strategy sessions. What if there were 2 people involved? One with technical knowledge, one who did the actual abduction. It's possible, Whitfield conceded, but that suggests organization, planning. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was calculated. The idea that Emma and Claire Mitchell had been deliberately targeted by an organized criminal enterprise was deeply disturbing, but the evidence increasingly pointed in that direction. On December 22nd, 5 days after the disappearance, they got their first significant break. A witness came forward, an elderly woman named Margaret Preston, who'd been at Carousel on the 17th, doing her Christmas shopping. I saw those girls. Preston told Whitfield and Cooper when they interviewed her at her home in Thornley. I saw them in the parking garage that afternoon. What time? Whitfield asked, leaning forward. 4:15, maybe 20 past, Preston said. I'd just gotten back to my car and was putting my shopping in the boot. They walked past me, those 2 pretty girls. I remember thinking how nice it was to see sisters shopping together. Reminded me of my own daughters when they were young. Did you see anyone with them or following them? Cooper asked. Preston nodded slowly. That's why I called. I've been seeing the news reports, seeing that sketch, and I remembered there was a man. He was maybe 20 yards behind them, walking the same direction. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. But now, remembering it, his behavior was odd. How so? Whitfield prompted. He was pretending not to follow them, if that makes sense, Preston explained. He'd stop and look at cars, like he was searching for his own vehicle, but his eyes kept going back to those girls. And when they turned down a row of cars, he turned down the same row, still keeping his distance. Did you get a good look at him? Whitfield asked. Not his face, Preston said. He had sunglasses on and a cap, just like in that sketch you released. But I saw his build, his clothing. He matched that drawing quite well. What happened then? Cooper asked. Did you see where they went? Preston shook her head regretfully. I got into my car and drove away. I wish now I'd paid more attention, but at the time I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Whitfield thanked her and arranged for her to come to the station the next day to give a formal statement and work with the sketch artist to refine the image based on her observations. After Preston left, Whitfield and Cooper sat in their car outside her house, processing this new information. She saw him following them, Cooper said. We have a witness who places our suspect with the victims at the critical time, which gives us evidence of abduction, Whitfield agreed. But we still don't have an identity. We need to find out who this man is. The refined sketch, based on Margaret Preston's observations, was released to the media on December 23rd. It showed slightly more detail, a fuller face shape, a more specific description of the cap and sunglasses. But it was still frustratingly vague. Christmas came and went with no sign of Emma and Claire Mitchell. The holiday season that should have been filled with celebration and family joy became an agony of waiting and hoping for the Mitchell family. Helen and Robert made tearful appeals on television, begging whoever had taken their daughters to return them safely. The public response was overwhelming. Donations poured in to support the search effort. Volunteer groups organized searches of bushland around Perth. Psychics called offering their visions of where the girls might be, though none of their information proved useful. Whitfield worked through Christmas, barely sleeping, driving his team hard but getting few results. The case was growing cold despite the intense effort being put into it. Then, on December 29th, everything changed. Margaret Preston was struck by a car while crossing the street near her home in Thornley. The vehicle, described by witnesses as a dark blue or black sedan, didn't stop. Preston was rushed to Royal Perth Hospital with critical injuries. She died 3 hours later without regaining consciousness. The traffic division investigated the hit and run. Their preliminary conclusion was that it appeared to be a tragic accident. Preston had been crossing against the light. The driver may not have seen her in time to stop. They appealed for the driver to come forward, but expected it was simply a case of someone panicking after an accident. Whitfield didn't believe in coincidences. The only witness who could potentially identify the man who'd followed Emma and Claire Mitchell was now dead, killed in what was being called an accident, just days after giving her statement to police. He visited the scene of the hit and run, examined the accident report, spoke to witnesses. The more he investigated, the more convinced he became that this was no accident. The driver deliberately accelerated before hitting her. One witness told him, "I saw it happen. The car was coming down the street at normal speed, then suddenly gunned the engine right before impact. It was like the driver aimed for her." Whitfield brought this information to his superintendent, requesting that the hit and run be investigated as potential murder connected to the Mitchell abduction case. The superintendent was skeptical. "You're suggesting someone killed a 63-year-old woman to prevent her from identifying them?" "She was our only witness," Whitfield argued. "Her death means we've lost the one person who saw the abductor's face clearly enough to potentially recognize him." "But she'd already given a statement," the superintendent pointed out. "She'd already worked with the sketch artist. What more could she have provided?" "She might have remembered additional details," Whitfield said. "Or she might have seen the suspect again and been able to identify him. Whoever took those girls knows she was a threat, so they eliminated her." The superintendent considered this. "It's a serious allegation. If you're right, it means we're dealing with someone willing to commit murder to avoid identification. Someone very dangerous. Which is why we need to catch them," Whitfield said. Chapter 4. The investigation into Margaret Preston's death ran parallel to the search for Emma and Claire Mitchell through January and February of 1982. Despite Whitfield's convictions, hard evidence linking the hit and run to the abduction case remained elusive. The vehicle that struck Preston was never found. Witnesses provided conflicting descriptions. Some said it was a dark blue sedan. Others insisted it was black. One thought it might have been a wagon. No one got a license plate number. Without the vehicle or a suspect, the traffic division eventually classified Preston's death as an unsolved hit and run, likely accidental despite the witness who claimed to have seen deliberate acceleration. The file remained open, but inactive. Whitfield refused to let it drop. He was convinced Preston had been murdered to silence her, which meant the abductor knew she'd given a statement to police. That information hadn't been made public. The only people who knew Preston had come forward were the police, the media who'd been briefed on background, and potentially anyone Preston herself had told. He interviewed Preston's family, friends, and neighbors. Had she mentioned to anyone that she'd spoken to police about the Mitchell case? Had she told anyone details of what she'd seen? The answers were uniformly yes. Preston had been proud of helping the investigation. She'd told her daughter, her neighbors, members of her church congregation. She'd discussed it at her bridge club. By her family's estimate, she'd probably told at least 30 or 40 people about being a witness. Any one of those people could have passed the information along, Cooper noted. If our abductor was connected to any of them, even tangentially, word could have reached him, which makes our suspect pool impossibly large, Whitfield said in frustration. We're looking for someone with technical knowledge to disable security cameras, someone who knew or followed the Mitchell girls, someone with access to information about police witnesses, and someone willing to commit murder. How many people fit all those criteria? Cooper had no answer. As January turned to February, the active search for Emma and Claire Mitchell scaled down. Police resources couldn't be dedicated indefinitely to a case with no new leads. The investigation remained open and assigned to Whitfield, but the large team that had been assembled was redirected to other cases. The Mitchell family struggled through the aftermath. Helen took a leave of absence from her teaching job, unable to function normally. Robert threw himself into work, using long hours at the engineering firm as an escape from the empty house. Emma's bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it on December 17th. Claire's collection of stuffed animals still lined her bed. Whitfield visited the family regularly, updating them on the investigation, even when there was little new to report. He felt a responsibility to them, a need to provide some measure of hope, even as his own optimism faded. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, a package arrived at the Mitchell home. It was addressed to Robert and Helen in typed letters. No return address. The postmark showed it had been mailed from Perth 2 days earlier. Robert opened it carefully. Inside was a small jewelry box wrapped in tissue paper. His hands shook as he unwrapped it. The box contained a silver bracelet, the one Claire Mitchell had been wearing when she disappeared. Helen's scream brought neighbors running. Police were called immediately. Whitfield arrived within 30 minutes, bringing forensic technicians with him. The package, box, and bracelet were all carefully examined for fingerprints, DNA, any trace evidence. The postmark and typed address were analyzed. Every aspect was scrutinized. The results were disappointing. No fingerprints except those of the mail carrier and the Mitchells. No DNA that could be traced. The typing had been done on a common typewriter model, impossible to identify specifically. The packaging materials were generic, available at any stationery store, but the bracelet was definitely Claire's. Helen identified it with certainty, pointing out a small dent on one side where Claire had banged it against a table leg months earlier. "Why send it now?" Cooper asked, as she and Whitfield reviewed the evidence at the station. Nearly 2 months after the abduction, Whitfield studied the photograph of the bracelet. "To taunt us, to remind the family that he has their daughters, to demonstrate his power." "But what's the purpose?" Cooper pressed. "Criminals who send tokens of their victims usually have demands. They want ransom or attention or something. This package had no note, no message, no demands. Maybe the message is the lack of a message," Whitfield suggested. "Maybe he's telling us that he can do whatever he wants, and we can't stop him." The package was analyzed by criminal psychologists. Their profile of the sender was disturbing. He was organized, patient, and sadistic. The act of keeping the bracelet for 2 months before sending it suggested he enjoyed the anticipation, the planning. He was intelligent enough to avoid leaving evidence, and he was confident enough to contact the victim's family directly. The profile also suggested the girls were likely dead. Keeping victims alive for 2 months would be difficult and risky. The bracelet was probably sent as a trophy, evidence of a completed crime rather than an ongoing abduction. Whitfield refused to accept this conclusion publicly, but privately he began to fear the psychologists were right. The search shifted subtly from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. Police focused on finding bodies, checking remote locations, following up on any reports of suspicious activity or disturbed ground. Nothing was found. In March, Whitfield made the difficult decision to return to the shopping center for a complete reconstruction of the day. He brought in detectives to play the roles of Emma and Claire, walking their exact route, timing every movement, looking for anything that might have been missed. They started at the eastern entrance at 1352, exactly when the real girls had arrived. The stand-ins, 2 young female officers of similar ages and appearances to the Mitchell sisters, walked through the shopping center following the security camera timeline. Record store at 14:15, food court at 14:43, Fashion First at 15:20. Whitfield had arranged for Fashion First to open specially for the reconstruction. The same staff members who'd been working on December 17th were brought in to recreate the conditions as closely as possible. The stand-in girls browsed the store for approximately 10 minutes, matching witness accounts of how long Emma and Claire had spent there. Then, at Whitfield's instruction, they left the store. Cameras captured them exiting into the corridor at 15:31. They walked toward the parking garage entrance, arriving at 16:27, exactly matching the timeline of the real girls. "Stop there," Whitfield called out. He stood in the parking garage entrance, looking back down the corridor they'd just walked. "From this angle, I can see Fashion First clearly. The cameras should have caught the real girls walking this entire distance. But they didn't," Cooper said, standing beside him. "The footage shows them entering Fashion First, but never leaving through the main entrance." Whitfield turned and walked back to Fashion First. The store had both a front entrance to the main corridor and a back door to the service corridor. He went through the store to the back door and examined it carefully. Patricia Walsh, who'd accompanied them for the reconstruction, explained, "That door is supposed to stay locked during business hours. Only management has keys." "Was it locked on December 17th? Whitfield asked. Walsh hesitated. "I think so, but honestly I can't be certain. We were very busy that day." Whitfield examined the lock mechanism. It was a simple deadbolt, easy to open from inside even when locked. Someone could have exited this way without being seen on the main cameras. "But why would Emma and Claire go through the service corridor?" Cooper asked. They'd have no reason to. Unless someone brought them through, Whitfield said quietly. Someone who had access to the service areas. Someone who knew they wouldn't be seen on camera back there. He radioed the reconstruction team. Bring the stand-ins to the back of Fashion first. Let's see where the service corridor leads. They traced multiple routes through the maze of service corridors. One led directly to the loading docks at the rear of the building. Another connected to the parking garage via a service elevator. A third ended at an emergency exit that opened onto an alley behind the shopping center. Any of these routes could have been used to move the girls without being seen on security cameras, Cooper noted. The person who took them knew the layout well, which suggests someone who works here or has worked here, Whitfield said. Security staff, maintenance, delivery drivers, anyone with regular access to these areas. They'd already interviewed everyone who fit that description, but Whitfield ordered the interviews done again, this time with specific questions about knowledge of the service corridors and the camera system. The re-interviews took weeks, but ultimately produced little new information. Everyone who worked at Carousel knew about the service corridors to some degree. Several admitted to using them as shortcuts, but no one stood out as particularly suspicious. Chapter 5. As the investigation approached the 6-month mark, pressure mounted on Whitfield and his team to produce results. The media, which had been largely supportive, began running stories questioning police competence. Public meetings were held where frustrated citizens demanded answers. The Mitchell case had become a national story. Emma and Claire's photographs appeared in newspapers and on television across Australia. The mystery of their disappearance captivated the public imagination. Theories proliferated, ranging from plausible to absurd. Some believed the girls had been abducted by a pedophile ring. Others suggested they'd been taken by a religious cult. Conspiracy theorists claimed government involvement. A few insisted the girls had run away voluntarily, though this theory was unsupported by any evidence. Whitfield ignored the speculation and focused on facts. 2 girls had entered a shopping center and vanished. Physical evidence suggested careful planning and inside knowledge. One witness had been killed before she could provide detailed identification, and the abductor had sent a trophy to the victim's family. These facts painted a picture of an organized, intelligent, and ruthless criminal, but they didn't point to a specific individual. In June of 1982, Whitfield's superintendent called him into a meeting. The chief commissioner was present, as was the minister for police. The message was clear before anyone spoke. "We need to scale down the investigation," the superintendent said. "It's been 6 months. We've exhausted every lead. Resources are needed elsewhere." "The case isn't solved," Whitfield protested. "Those girls are still missing. The person who took them is still out there. And we're not giving up," the superintendent assured him. "But we can't maintain a dedicated team indefinitely. You'll continue as the lead investigator, but with reduced support." Whitfield knew this was coming but still felt defeated. "How can I investigate properly without resources?" The chief commissioner spoke for the first time. "You'll have access to resources as needed for specific leads, but we can't justify full-time commitment from multiple officers on a case with no active developments. You understand the realities of police work, Sergeant Whitfield." It was not a question. Whitfield understood perfectly. The Mitchell case would remain open, but it would effectively be put on hold unless new evidence emerged. He returned to his desk and sat alone in the incident room, looking at the whiteboard covered in notes, photographs, and timelines. 6 months of intensive work had produced theories, but no arrests. Questions, but no answers. Cooper found him there an hour later. "I heard about the decision," she said quietly. "We failed them," Whitfield said, not looking away from Emma and Claire's photographs on the board. "We failed those girls and their family. We did everything we could," Cooper replied. "Sometimes that's not enough. It has to be enough," Whitfield said with sudden intensity. "We're the police. People trust us to protect them, to find them when they're in danger, to bring criminals to justice. If we can't do that, what's the point?" Cooper had no answer. Over the following months, Whitfield continued working the case, but with diminishing returns. Leads that had seemed promising months earlier had been exhausted. Witnesses who might have seen something had been interviewed repeatedly. The physical evidence had been examined and re-examined. In September, nearly 9 months after the disappearance, 2 hikers found skeletal remains in bushland near Armadale, about 20 kilometers south of Perth. Police rushed to the scene, hoping and dreading in equal measure that they'd finally found Emma and Claire Mitchell. Forensic examination revealed the remains were those of a single adult male who'd been dead for at least several years. Not the Mitchell sisters. The false alarm was emotionally devastating for the Mitchell family, who'd been informed of the discovery and spent agonizing hours waiting for identification. Whitfield personally visited them to deliver the news. Seeing relief and disappointment wore on their faces. "We don't know if they're alive or dead," Helen said, her voice hollow. "Part of me hopes they're alive somewhere, even if they're suffering, because at least there's a chance we could get them back. But another part of me almost hopes they died quickly, that they didn't suffer for long. What kind of mother thinks that way? A mother in an impossible situation," Whitfield said gently. "You're not wrong for having those thoughts. Anyone would feel the same way." "Do you think they're dead?" Robert asked bluntly. "Honestly." Whitfield had always been honest with the Mitchells. He wouldn't stop now. "Based on my experience and the evidence we have, I think it's likely, but I don't know for certain. And until we find them, or find who took them, there's always a possibility I'm wrong." The first anniversary of the disappearance passed in December of 1982. The media ran retrospective stories. The Mitchells held a memorial service at their church, though technically it wasn't a funeral since there were no bodies. Whitfield attended, sitting in the back pew, feeling the weight of his failure. The investigation continued through 1983 and into 1984, but it had become a cold case in all but name. Whitfield spent a few hours a week reviewing files, following up on occasional tips that came in, but nothing substantive developed. In mid-1984, he was promoted to detective inspector and given a new assignment, leading a team investigating a series of armed robberies. The Mitchell case remained on his desk, but it was no longer his primary focus. Cooper had been reassigned months earlier to other investigations. The incident room at Cannington Police Station was repurposed. The whiteboard was cleaned, the photographs taken down. The physical evidence was catalogued and stored. The case files were boxed up and archived. To the public, the disappearance of Emma and Claire Mitchell gradually faded from immediate memory, becoming another unsolved mystery in Australia's criminal history. For those directly involved, the family and the investigators, the case never truly closed. Chapter 6. Years passed. Whitfield continued his police career, rising through the ranks, working hundreds of other cases. But Emma and Claire Mitchell haunted him. Their photographs remained in a folder in his desk drawer. Once a year, on December 17th, he pulled out the file and reviewed it, looking for something he might have missed. He never found it. The Mitchell family struggled to move forward. Helen eventually returned to teaching but transferred to a different school, unable to face the sympathy and questions from colleagues who'd known her daughters. Robert threw himself deeper into work, becoming a senior partner at his engineering firm. They stayed together but grew emotionally distant, their shared grief a barrier rather than a bond. In 1990, nearly 9 years after the disappearance, David Chen died of a heart attack at age 45. Whitfield attended the funeral, paying respects to a man who'd done everything possible to help the investigation. At the wake, Whitfield spoke with Chen's widow. "David never got over it," she said quietly. "He felt responsible, like he should have protected those girls. I told him it wasn't his fault, but he wouldn't believe me." "It wasn't his fault," Whitfield agreed. "He did his job well. The fault lies with whoever took them." In 1995, Patricia Walsh, the fashion-first manager who'd witnessed Emma and Claire's last known moments in the store, contacted police with new information. She'd been in therapy for depression, and during a session had recovered a memory she'd suppressed. Whitfield, now a detective superintendent, took the call personally. "I remember now," Walsh said, her voice shaking. "When those girls left my store, I did see them go through the back door. I'd forgotten, or maybe I blocked it out because it seemed wrong, but they didn't go alone. A man in a security uniform guided them through. He told me there was a situation in the parking garage and he was escorting them to their mother's car for safety." "Why didn't you mention this before?" Whitfield asked, trying to keep accusation out of his voice. "I don't know," Walsh said, crying now. "I didn't remember. Or I did remember, but it seemed normal at the time, so I didn't think to mention it. I've been going over that day in my mind for 14 years, and this memory just surfaced. I had to call." "Can you describe the security guard?" "No," Walsh admitted. "I only glanced at him. I saw the uniform and assumed he was legitimate. I can't even tell you if he was tall or short, young or old. I'm sorry." Whitfield thanked her and immediately pulled the archived case files. Security uniforms. Someone wearing what appeared to be legitimate security clothing, having access to restricted areas, able to bypass cameras because staff would assume he belonged there. It made perfect sense. It explained how the abductor could move the girls through the service corridors without raising suspicion, but it also meant their suspect pool had just expanded dramatically. Anyone could have obtained or created a fake security uniform. He reviewed the list of Carousel security staff from 1981 one more time. David Chen and his team of 6. All had been thoroughly investigated. All had alibis. All appeared innocent. But what if the security guard Walsh saw hadn't been part of the official team? What if someone had obtained a uniform and impersonated security? Whitfield contacted Secure Watch Systems, the company that had installed the camera system. He asked for employment records from 1981, specifically anyone who might have worked at Carousel and had access to a security uniform. The company had changed ownership twice since 1981, and records were incomplete. But they were able to provide a list of 7 technicians who'd been employed at that time and might have had legitimate reasons to be at Carousel, wearing what could be mistaken for a security uniform. All 7 were tracked down and re-interviewed. 3 had moved interstate. 2 had died. The remaining 2 were interviewed extensively, but provided solid alibis for December 17th, 1981. Another dead end. Chapter 7. In 2001, 20 years after the disappearance, a television documentary revisited the Mitchell case. The program, part of a series on Australia's most infamous unsolved crimes, featured interviews with Whitfield, the Mitchell family, and various experts. The documentary brought renewed public attention to the case. Tips flooded in, mostly from people who'd seen the program and wanted to share their theories or recollections. Each tip was investigated, though none produced significant leads. One tip, however, stood out. A woman named Jennifer Richards called to report that her former husband, Gary Richards, had worked as a technician for Secure Watch Systems in the early 1980s and had exhibited disturbing behavior around that time. Whitfield, now close to retirement, personally followed up on the tip. He drove to Jennifer Richards' home in Bunbury, 2 hours south of Perth, to interview her. Jennifer was in her mid-50s, a school teacher with a neat home and a calm demeanor. She invited Whitfield in and offered tea, clearly nervous but determined to share what she knew. Gary and I married in 1979, she began. He was working for Secure Watch at the time. Things were good at first, but by 1981, his behavior had changed. He became secretive, stayed out late, claimed to be working overtime, but I could never reach him at the office. Did he work at Carousel Shopping Centre? Whitfield asked. I think so, Jennifer said. He mentioned it a few times, but he worked at lots of places, installing and maintaining security systems all over Perth. What made you think to call about him in relation to the Mitchell case? Jennifer set down her teacup with shaking hands. After I saw the documentary, I started thinking about that time, about how strange Gary had been, and I remembered something I'd forgotten. In December of 1981, right around the time those girls disappeared, Gary brought home a bracelet. Whitfield's attention sharpened. What kind of bracelet? Silver, Jennifer said, with a delicate chain. He said he'd bought it for me as an early Christmas gift, but it wasn't new. I could tell it had been worn. There were scratches on it, and it was sized for someone smaller than me, like a teenager. What happened to the bracelet? Whitfield asked urgently. I wore it a few times to make him happy, Jennifer said, but honestly, it creeped me out. Something about it felt wrong. Eventually, I lost it, or misplaced it. I'm not sure. This was 20 years ago. What else can you tell me about Gary? Whitfield pressed. We divorced in 1983, Jennifer said. He'd become increasingly paranoid, accused me of having affairs even though I'd never been unfaithful. The final straw was when he hit me during an argument. I left him and never looked back. Do you know where he is now? Last I heard, he was still in Perth, Jennifer said, but we haven't had contact in nearly 20 years. I have no idea what he's doing or where he lives. Whitfield thanked her and immediately returned to Perth. Gary Richards became his primary person of interest in the Mitchell case. He assigned 2 detectives to locate and conduct surveillance on Richards, while he compiled everything known about the man. Gary Richards, now 56 years old, lived alone in a small house in Gosnells, a suburb southeast of Perth. He worked as a handyman, doing odd jobs for various clients. He had a criminal record for assault stemming from a domestic violence incident in the late 80s. He'd served 18 months in prison. Whitfield obtained a warrant to search Richards' home. Early on a Wednesday morning, a team of officers executed the search while Richards was taken into custody for questioning. The house was cluttered and dirty, filled with old newspapers, broken electronics, and tools. In a locked shed in the backyard, they found more concerning items. Photographs of young women. Some appeared to be surveillance photos taken without the subject's knowledge, newspaper clippings about various missing persons cases from across Australia, and a collection of women's jewelry, including several bracelets. Whitfield interviewed Richards personally at the police station. Richards was a thin man with thinning hair and nervous mannerisms. He chain-smoked despite the no-smoking policy and couldn't sit still. "Mr. Richards, we found some disturbing items in your home," Whitfield began. "I need you to explain them." "They're just pictures," Richards said defensively. "I like to take photographs. It's not illegal. Some of those photographs appear to be surveillance images taken without consent," Whitfield said. "That is illegal. And the jewelry collection is concerning given your ex-wife's statement about a bracelet you gave her in 1981. "I collect things," Richards said. "Flea markets, secondhand shops. I buy jewelry sometimes." "So what? Tell me about December 17, 1981, Whitfield said. "Where were you that day?" Richards laughed. 20 years ago? You're asking me where I was on a specific day 20 years ago? I have no idea." "You worked for Secure Watch Systems then," Whitfield said. "You had access to shopping center security systems, including Carousel." "I worked lots of places," Richards replied. "I don't remember specifically." "Do you remember Emma and Claire Mitchell?" Whitfield asked, watching Richards carefully. Something flickered in Richards' eyes. Fear? Guilt? It passed too quickly to identify. "I've seen the news reports," Richards said. "Everyone in Perth knows about those girls, but I don't know them. Never met them." The interview continued for hours. Richards maintained his innocence, claimed his photograph collection was innocent hobby, insisted the jewelry had been bought legally. He provided no specific alibi for December 17, 1981, but argued that the lack of alibi after 20 years proved nothing. Whitfield knew he didn't have enough for an arrest. Suspicious behavior and a collection of disturbing items weren't proof of murder or abduction. He needed physical evidence linking Richards to the Mitchell sisters. Forensic teams examined every item seized from Richards's home. DNA technology had advanced significantly since 1981. If any of the jewelry or photographs could be connected to Emma or Claire Mitchell, it would be the break they needed. The analysis took weeks. In the end, none of the jewelry was conclusively matched to the Mitchell sisters. The silver bracelets in Richards' collection were similar to Claire's missing bracelet, but not identical. Without the actual bracelet for comparison, and with no DNA evidence available from items that had been handled by multiple people over decades, forensic confirmation was impossible. The photographs were similarly inconclusive. Some showed young women who resembled Emma and Claire, but the images were poor quality, and the subjects could have been anyone. Richards claimed they were photos he'd taken at public events and locations, which, if true, wouldn't be illegal, even if creepy. After 6 weeks, Whitfield was forced to release Richards without charges. There simply wasn't enough evidence to proceed to trial. The decision was devastating. Whitfield was convinced Richards was involved in the Mitchell disappearance, possibly as the abductor, possibly as an accomplice. But conviction required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and they didn't have it. Richards immediately left Perth. Whitfield assigned officers to track his movements, but surveillance had to be discontinued after a few weeks due to resource constraints. Richards settled in Queensland, as far from Perth as he could get while remaining in Australia. Chapter 8. Whitfield retired from the Western Australia Police Force in 2003, after 45 years of service. At his retirement party, colleagues toasted his distinguished career and many successful investigations, but Whitfield's mind was elsewhere, stuck on the one case he'd never solved. In retirement, he became obsessed with the Mitchell disappearance in ways his professional duties had previously prevented. He dedicated a room in his home to the case, covering walls with maps, photographs, timelines. He tracked down every person tangentially connected to the investigation and re-interviewed them. His wife worried about his mental health. "You need to let this go," she told him repeatedly. "It's been over 20 years. You've done everything you could." But Whitfield couldn't let it go. Emma and Claire Mitchell deserved justice. Their family deserved answers. And he was convinced those answers existed somewhere, waiting to be discovered. In 2005, advances in DNA technology prompted Western Australia police to review several cold cases, including the Mitchell disappearance. Evidence that had been collected in 1981 was re-examined with modern forensic techniques. The results were disappointing. Most of the physical evidence had degraded over 24 years of storage. What little DNA could be extracted was contaminated by handling over the decades, or was insufficient for analysis. However, one item did yield results. A fiber found on the Fashion First Service door in 1981, preserved as potential evidence, was analyzed with modern methods. The fiber was identified as coming from a specific type of security uniform manufactured by a company called TrueGuard that supplied uniforms to several security firms in Western Australia during the early 1980s, including secure watch systems. This finding supported the theory that someone in a security uniform had taken the girls through the service corridor, but it didn't identify who. Whitfield contacted every security company that had used TrueGuard uniforms in 1981. He obtained employee records, cross-referenced names with the list of people who'd had access to Carousel. The process took months of painstaking work. One name appeared on multiple lists: Michael Drayton. He'd worked as a security contractor in the late 70s and early 80s, doing shifts for various companies. He'd worked at Carousel on several occasions in 1981, including once in November, just weeks before the Mitchell sisters disappeared. Whitfield investigated Drayton thoroughly. He was now 61 years old, living in Mandurah, south of Perth. He'd left the security industry in the mid-80s and worked various jobs before retiring on disability in the late 90s. Running background checks revealed disturbing information. Drayton had been investigated in 1984 in connection with the assault of a teenage girl, though charges were never filed due to insufficient evidence. In 1992, he'd been questioned about the disappearance of a young woman in Mandurah, again without charges resulting. This was the pattern Whitfield had been looking for. A man with access to Carousel, knowledge of security systems, a history of being investigated but never convicted. Michael Drayton fit the profile perfectly. Whitfield brought his findings to the Western Australia Police. They agreed to reopen the active investigation of the Mitchell case with Drayton as the primary suspect. Surveillance was established. Drayton's financial records, phone records, and associates were examined. The investigation revealed that Drayton had traveled to Queensland in 2001, shortly after Gary Richards had moved there. Phone records showed multiple calls between them over the following years. This connection electrified the investigation. Two suspects with disturbing histories, both with access to Carousel in 1981, both in contact with each other. Had they worked together? Was one the abductor and the other an accomplice? In March of 2006, police obtained warrants to search Drayton's home and arrest him for questioning. A coordinated operation also saw Gary Richards arrested simultaneously in Queensland. The searches of both homes yielded disturbing finds. In Drayton's garage, police discovered a storage unit containing women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items that had no legitimate reason to be there. Among them was a school identification card belonging to Emma Mitchell, the one she'd been carrying the day she disappeared. The discovery was a breakthrough. Drayton was formally arrested and charged with the abduction and murder of Emma and Claire Mitchell. Richard's home in Queensland also yielded evidence. In a locked box in his bedroom, police found photographs, not surveillance images this time, but Polaroid pictures that appeared to show two young women who closely resembled Emma and Claire Mitchell. The photos were of poor quality, and the subjects' faces were partially obscured, but forensic analysis suggested they were likely the missing sisters. The photos appeared to have been taken in some kind of basement or underground room with concrete walls. The subjects were restrained and appeared distressed. The images were horrifying evidence of what the girls had endured. Both Drayton and Richards were charged with abduction, unlawful imprisonment, and murder. The cases were prepared for trial. Chapter 9. The trial of Michael Drayton began in August of 2007 at the Supreme Court of Western Australia in Perth. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case built on physical evidence, witness testimony, and circumstantial connections. They established that Drayton had worked at Carousel multiple times in 1981 and had the knowledge to disable the security camera. They presented the fiber evidence linking him to the service corridor. They showed the jury Emma Mitchell's identification card found in his home, and they presented expert testimony analyzing the Polaroid photographs found at Richard's home, suggesting they depicted the Mitchell sisters. Drayton's defense attorney argued that the identification card could have been obtained innocently, that Drayton collected various items from his security work over the years. The fiber evidence, the defense claimed, merely proved he'd been in the service corridor at some point, not necessarily on the day of the abduction, and the photographs, while disturbing, couldn't be definitively proven to show Emma and Claire. The prosecution called Robert and Helen Mitchell to testify. They identified items found in Drayton's possession as belonging to their daughters. Helen broke down on the stand when shown Emma's identification card, confirming it was the one her daughter had been carrying on December 17, 1981. Margaret Preston's daughter testified about her mother's witness statement and her subsequent death in the hit and run. The prosecution suggested, though couldn't prove definitively, that Drayton had been responsible for Preston's death to silence her testimony. David Chen's widow testified about her late husband's cooperation with the investigation and his conviction that the security system had been deliberately tampered with by someone with inside knowledge. The most damaging evidence came from a former associate of Drayton's, a man named Thomas Warner, who'd worked security with Drayton in the early 1980s. Warner testified that Drayton had expressed inappropriate interest in teenage girls, had made disturbing comments about wanting to collect pretty young women, and had once showed Warner photographs of girls he'd taken without their knowledge. Warner also testified that in early 1982, Drayton had asked him for help moving some items from a storage unit to a remote property Drayton owned in the bush outside Perth. Warner had helped load heavy items wrapped in tarps into a truck but hadn't seen what was inside. Now, he testified, he believed he'd helped Drayton dispose of the Mitchell sisters' bodies. Drayton took the stand in his own defense, denying all allegations. He claimed the items found in his home had been collected innocently over years of working in security. He said he had no memory of working at Carousel specifically, and certainly hadn't abducted anyone. He suggested he was being framed, that someone had planted Emma's identification card in his belongings. Under cross-examination, the prosecution destroyed his credibility. They presented evidence of his previous investigations, his pattern of being near other crimes but never charged. They questioned why, if he was innocent, he had maintained contact with Gary Richards, another suspect. Drayton had no good answers. Gary Richards' trial proceeded separately, beginning in October of 2007. The evidence against him was somewhat weaker than against Drayton. The Polaroid photographs had been in his possession, but he claimed they'd been given to him by someone else, that he'd kept them as insurance against that person. That person, Richards eventually claimed, was Michael Drayton. Richards testified that Drayton had abducted the Mitchell sisters and brought them to a property he owned. Richards admitted to being present, to taking the photographs, but claimed he'd been coerced by Drayton and feared for his own life if he reported what was happening. The prosecution didn't believe his story, presenting evidence that Richards had been an active participant rather than a coerced witness. They argued that Drayton and Richards had worked together, with Drayton using his security access to abduct the girls, and Richards helping to hold and eventually dispose of them. Both men were convicted. The jury in Drayton's trial deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Richards's jury took 3 days. Sentencing hearings were held in December of 2007. The judge, Justice Margaret Harrison, described the crimes as among the most heinous she'd encountered in her legal career. "You abducted 2 innocent young women who were engaged in the ordinary activity of shopping," Justice Harrison said to Drayton. "You held them captive, subjected them to unimaginable suffering, and ultimately murdered them. You then evaded justice for over 25 years, allowing their family to suffer without answers. Your crimes warrant the maximum penalty available under law." Michael Drayton was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Gary Richards received life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 35 years due to his lesser but still significant role. Neither man ever revealed where the bodies of Emma and Claire Mitchell were located. Despite extensive searches of properties Drayton had owned or had access to, despite offers of reduced sentences in exchange for information, both men maintained silence about the final resting place of their victims. Chapter 10. The convictions brought some measure of closure to the Mitchell family, though the absence of remains meant true closure remained elusive. Robert and Helen attended every day of both trials, sitting in the public gallery, watching the men who destroyed their family face justice at last. After the sentencing, they held a press conference alongside Detective Whitfield, who'd been instrumental in finally solving the case. "We're grateful to everyone who never stopped searching for our daughters," Robert said, his voice steady despite obvious emotion. Detective Whitfield gave 25 years of his life to finding Emma and Claire. "We can never repay that dedication," Helen added. "We know our girls are gone. We've known it in our hearts for years, but now we have confirmation. Now the men who took them will pay for their crimes. That's not the ending we wanted, but it's the ending we have. Emma and Claire will never be forgotten." Whitfield, uncomfortable with being called a hero, deflected praise to the team of investigators who'd worked the case over the decades. "This wasn't one person's achievement," he said. "This was hundreds of police officers, forensic experts, witnesses, and members of the public who never gave up. Emma and Claire Mitchell mattered to this community. That's why we never stopped looking." The case had profound effects on shopping centre security across Australia. Carousel Shopping Centre, which had struggled with the association to the abduction for years, implemented comprehensive security reforms. All service corridors were placed under camera surveillance. Access to restricted areas was tightly controlled. Staff training emphasized vigilance and reporting suspicious behavior. Other shopping centers followed suit. The Mitchell case became a cautionary tale used in security training programs nationwide. The phrase, "it could happen anywhere," took on new meaning. Parents became more cautious about allowing teenagers to shop unsupervised. In 2008, the Mitchell family established a foundation in Emma and Claire's memory, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and funding research into abduction prevention. The foundation provided counseling services, assisted with search efforts, and lobbied for legislative changes to improve how missing persons cases were handled. Michael Drayton remained in Casuarina Prison in Perth, refusing all interview requests, maintaining his silence about the location of the bodies. Fellow inmates reported that he kept to himself, showing no remorse or emotion about his crimes. Gary Richards, held in a Queensland prison, fared worse. In 2012, he was assaulted by other inmates who'd learned of his crimes. He survived, but was left with permanent injuries, and was subsequently held in protective custody. Detective Whitfield, now in his 80s, continued to pursue one final piece of the puzzle, finding Emma and Claire's remains. He consulted with forensic anthropologists, studied maps of areas Drayton had frequented, and organized volunteer search teams to explore remote bushland. In 2015, 34 years after the disappearance, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former inmate who'd served time with Drayton contacted police, claiming Drayton had told him where the bodies were buried, during a moment of apparent guilt or perhaps boasting. According to this inmate, whose credibility was questionable given his own criminal history, Drayton had buried the sisters on a remote property near Jarradale, about 50 kilometers southeast of Perth. The property had been owned by Drayton's uncle and had been sold years earlier, but the inmate provided specific details about the location. Whitfield, despite his age and retirement status, personally joined the search team. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, police scoured the property for weeks. On November 3, 2015, the dogs indicated on a spot in a wooded area about 100 meters from the old farmhouse on the property. Careful excavation began. 20 feet down, in a carefully concealed grave, they found the skeletal remains of 2 individuals. Forensic examination confirmed they were female, approximately the right ages, and had been buried for several decades. DNA comparison with samples from Robert and Helen Mitchell provided definitive identification. Emma and Claire Mitchell had finally been found. The discovery made international news. After 34 years, the Mitchell sisters were coming home. A funeral was held in December of 2015 at the same church where a memorial service had been held 34 years earlier. The service was attended by hundreds of people, including police officers who'd worked the case, journalists who'd covered it, and members of the public who'd never forgotten the 2 smiling girls from the photographs. Robert Mitchell, now 76 years old, delivered a eulogy. "Emma loved music and dancing," he said, his voice breaking. "Claire loved animals and wanted to be a veterinarian. They were kind, intelligent, full of dreams for the future. Those dreams were stolen from them by evil men, but their memory lives on in everyone who knew them, everyone who searched for them, everyone who refused to forget them." Helen was too overcome to speak, but placed flowers on both caskets, whispering private words to the daughters she'd lost so long ago. Emma and Claire Mitchell were buried together in Carricata Cemetery in Perth. Their headstone bore their names, dates, and a simple inscription chosen by their parents: "Beloved daughters and sisters, forever young, forever remembered." Epilogue. The case of Emma and Claire Mitchell remains one of Australia's most notorious abduction cases. It's studied in criminology courses, referenced in discussions of missing persons investigations, and remembered as both a tragedy and a testament to perseverance. Detective James Whitfield died in 2018 at age 87. His obituary called him one of Western Australia's finest investigators, noting that he'd solved over 200 major cases during his career. But those who knew him understood that the Mitchell case had defined him, driven him, haunted him, until the day the sisters were finally found. At his funeral, Sandra Cooper, his former partner who'd remained close to him through retirement, delivered a eulogy. "Jim never gave up on those girls," she said. "When everyone else said the case was hopeless, when resources were pulled, when years passed with no leads, Jim kept working. He kept believing they could be found, and because of his dedication, they were. That's the mark of a great detective. That's the measure of the man we're honoring today." The Mitchell Foundation continues its work, having helped hundreds of families dealing with missing loved ones. Robert Mitchell remained active in the foundation until his death in 2020 at age 81. Helen continues to serve on the board, now in her 80s, but still committed to honoring her daughter's memory by helping others. Michael Drayton died in prison in 2021 at age 76. He never expressed remorse, never explained his motives, never provided details about what happened to Emma and Claire beyond what evidence and testimony had revealed. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. UNM mourned, except perhaps by the few family members who'd maintained contact despite his crimes. Gary Richards remains imprisoned in Queensland, serving his life sentence. Now in his 70s and in poor health, he continues to maintain he was a coerced participant rather than an active accomplice, though no one believes him. The Carousel Shopping Centre still operates in Cannington, though it's been extensively renovated and expanded since 1981. The management has placed a small memorial plaque near the eastern entrance, the spot where Emma and Claire were last seen on security cameras. The plaque simply reads, "In memory of Emma and Claire Mitchell, December 17th, 1981. You are not forgotten." Every December 17th, people leave flowers at the plaque. Roses, lilies, simple bouquets with cards expressing sympathy for the family or determination that such crimes should never happen again. The Mitchell sisters, who would now be in their 50s had they lived, remain frozen in public memory as teenagers, forever 16 and 14, forever walking through a shopping centre on a summer afternoon. The case changed how Australia approaches missing persons investigations. The Mitchell case led to reforms including faster response times when children are reported missing, better coordination between jurisdictions, improved forensic capabilities, and public awareness campaigns about personal safety. But perhaps the most lasting impact is the reminder that evil can strike anywhere, at any time. A shopping mall in suburban Perth seemed like one of the safest places two teenage girls could be. Yet it became the site of their abduction, the beginning of a nightmare that lasted 26 years before the truth was finally revealed. The case also demonstrates the importance of never giving up. James Whitfield and countless others worked for decades on a case that seemed hopeless. They faced dead ends, false leads, bureaucratic obstacles, and public criticism. But they persisted, and ultimately, they succeeded in bringing two murderers to justice and giving a family the closure they desperately needed. For those who study the case, several lessons emerge. First, the importance of preserving evidence properly, even in cases that seem unsolvable, because technology advances and old evidence can become newly relevant. Second, the value of witness testimony, as Margaret Preston's observations proved crucial, even though she died before being able to provide fuller details. Third, the need for systematic investigation of all potential suspects, as both Drayton and Richards had been questioned early, but not thoroughly enough. And finally, the case reminds us of the human cost of unsolved crimes. For 26 years, the Mitchell family lived in agony, not knowing what had happened to their daughters. That suffering, multiplied across all the families dealing with missing loved ones, represents a profound failure of justice that society must work harder to prevent. The story of Emma and Claire Mitchell is ultimately a tragedy. Two young lives cut short, a family devastated, a community traumatized. But it's also a story of dedication, perseverance, and the refusal to let evil triumph completely. Detective Whitfield's final entry in his case notes, written the day Emma and Claire were found, summarized it best. After 34 years, these girls can finally rest in peace. Their family can finally begin to heal. Justice, delayed far too long, has been served. My only regret is that it took so long. My only satisfaction is that we never stopped trying. Those words stand as both an epitaph for two lost young women and a testament to all those who refuse to let the innocent be forgotten, who work tirelessly to bring light to darkness, who never stop seeking truth, even when it seems impossibly distant. Emma and Claire Mitchell disappeared on December 17th, 1981. They were found on November 3rd, 2015. The time between those dates represents thousands of hours of investigation, countless tears shed by family and friends, and the unwavering determination of people who believed that every victim deserves justice, no matter how long it takes. The case is closed. The perpetrators were caught and convicted. The victims were found and laid to rest. But the memory of two sisters, stolen from their family on a summer afternoon at a shopping mall, endures. Their story continues to resonate, to educate, and to remind us all that vigilance and compassion are not optional but essential. In the end, the horror of the mall abduction of 1981 was not just what happened to Emma and Claire Mitchell, but how easily it could have been prevented if security had been better, if witnesses had been more alert, if society had taken the protection of young people more seriously. Their legacy is that now we do. Because of them, shopping centers are safer. Because of them, missing persons cases are handled more urgently. Because of them, families in similar situations receive more support. Emma and Claire Mitchell were stolen from us, but their impact, the changes they inspired, the awareness they raised, continues to protect others. That's not the legacy they would have chosen, but it's a legacy that ensures they will never be forgotten. And in the end, perhaps that's the most important thing, that we remember, that we learn, that we do better. Two sisters disappeared in 1981, but their story, their memory, and the justice finally served in their names will echo far beyond their short lives, touching people who never knew them, in places and times they never reached, but whose lives are safer because of what happened after they were taken. That's the true ending to this horror. Not the abduction, not the murder, not even the convictions, but the ongoing commitment to remember, to protect, and to never let such a tragedy be forgotten or be in vain. Emma and Claire Mitchell, forever young, forever remembered, forever making the world a safer place, even in their absence.